Well, so can you tell us a little bit about your favorite records and then kind of getting into the production side of things?
Sure, sure. I think a couple of other records. There was a Count Basie record that my mum had, which sounded beautiful in terms of big band. There was a Quincy Jones record called Smackwater Jack, which I absolutely loved. There was a Canadian trombone group, and I have no idea, I can't remember, but I had this record. I don't even know how I got this record, but somehow it ended up at our house, and I played it, and I love this record because I think it was three or four trombones and rhythm section. It was a Canadian guy, Canadian artist. I have no idea what his name was, but I love this record because the sound, I love trombone for a start, but the sound of the record was just glorious. And the music was pretty cool too. Harmonically was very interesting. Um, so those are some of the records I remember. I remember Jethro Tull, Thick as a Brick, which was recorded by Robin Black. And when I listened to that record many years later, especially on Heavy, I realized how amazing the mix was. And that was before computer mix. And that was in the days where all hands on deck, and you used to do sections. And that's actually, in later years, that's how I learned to do it. But you would do like if you were doing a plain pop song, you would say, let's do all the choruses, lay them down onto quarter inch or half inch, depending what era we're in.
Oh, really? Okay.
Then you go back to the verses, lay those down, and then intro, and then you just spend, an hour or so, maybe less, editing it all together. You have to keep very good records, which
Right.
verses which.
Yeah.
But you do it in order, if you can. Um, and basically, all the faders we used to put tape I used to put colored markers. So those colored markers would, let's say, blue would be all verse, red would be chorus. And I'd move all the faders, and then I'd make some notes. There might be some reverb send. The sends would usually stay the same unless you wanted a special effect. Um, if you were paralleling channels, which means you had a 24 track machine, and before computer mixing, we had actually 24 tracks. We didn't used to lose one on the track for SMPTE code, or EBU, depending where you are. Um, and sometimes, let's say tracks 13 and 14, you used to mix tracks a lot. If you could see which of course I lost, sadly, my original tracks sheet for Crises, the Mike Oldfield album. I mean, it's really long because it's one piece of music. It's 20 minutes long.
It's incredible. Yeah.
Not all those tracks remain like kick drum. Doesn't always stay being a kick drum. Acoustic guitar, which may be panned, or let's say, make this simpler. Piano, which is two tracks panned left and right, let's say on channels 13 and 14. But sometimes you need that channel. So suddenly channel 13 is a banjo, but it needs to be panned in the middle, right? So what we would do is using the patch bay, parallel up channel 13, which is track 13, to maybe channel 26, which might be free. And then you just mute it there, and you unmute that button there, and it's the EQ's all done, reverb center's all done, positioning is all done. And then when he's finished playing, you mute it and unmute your left side to the piano, which might now be the left side of the strings.
Wow. Yeah.
This is all about organization. You try to keep a left and right, always a left and right. Piano, organ, strings, whatever the stereo is. In those days, we didn't have too many instruments that were actually stereo, funnily enough. A lot of synthesizers were mono. So you would create stereo using outboard equipment. So those are the type of things going on in those days. And moving along so I was really into this, and I used to sit in on any mixing session I could, just sit at the back and watch. And even a recording session, I'd go in there. I'd actually get to the studio as early as I could if I wasn't coming from another studio, set up my kit, and then go in and watch the maintenance engineer align the tape machine, because I wanted to understand what that was all about, you know. And he'd start off with his 1 kilohertz. I used to be able to do it, but we don't hear that tone anymore. Well, not often. Maybe that's 1K, something like that.
Yeah.
And he'd align all 24 tracks, and then he'd go to 10K, and he'd do his high frequency, and then, of course, his low frequency, which he'd have to record. In Europe, it's 50 hertz. In the States, it's 60 hertz. So I was starting to get the idea of how the tape machine works and alignment, batches of tape, but I wasn't there yet. You know, I was just watching and trying to understand, and then watching the engineers like crazy, watching all the little things they would do, little, outboard bits of equipment they would use. And then I turned up to a recording session with Mike Oldfield. We did a week of tracking on crises with another engineer. But he obviously saw that I was quite aware of the technical side, because I was very interested in his Fairlight that he was using and all his machines and stuff. I just look at like this Ampex ATR, ATR 100, I think it is, half-inch machine, which is a stereo machine, and he had an Ampex ATR 124 2-inch machine and a Neve 8108. And he called me a week or two later and said, well, what are you up to? I said, well, I'm doing this and that, and actually I've just started producing an artist, and this artist was called Duncan Brown, which I did quite a few records with. And he said, oh, you produce? And I said, well, I'm just starting, really. He said, how would you like to come and produce me? I was like, sure, yeah, lovely. So we set up a trial week just to see how we'd get on, working obviously much closer together, and So I thought, right, he's got a Neve console. I better get an engineer that's a Neve engineer, who understands a Neve console. So I called Air Studios, which were all Neves in those days, and I found, I don't remember his name, sadly, but he was Scottish. Anyway, we both turned up, and we started working on this one song, which I had played on, but Mike had already added a few different things. And so we did the first day. Most of it was just kind of figuring out what we wanted to keep and what we wanted to scrap. Mike was very good at doing that. And I said, no, let's get rid of those. I don't like those. Don't like that. And we ended up with drum kit and voice, which was Roger Chapman. And he wanted to replace everything that he'd done. He wasn't happy with it. We got to the end of the day, and I went home, and I went to the hotel, actually, and I went, wow, well, this is going to be interesting and quite tough. I turn up the next day, no engineer. I said to Mike, where's, I can't remember his name, Scottish man. He said, oh, I fired him. Oh, really? Yeah, we don't need him. I didn't get on with him. Which, Mike, I would understand. And I went, oh. And then he left the room, and I'm like sitting there, at the consoles right in front of me, tape machines behind me, and I'm going, yikes. And he comes in with a 3-inch thick Neve manual, plonks it on the table. He says, I'll be back in a few hours. Read that. And I went, oh my God, this is, oh shit. Oh no. And I'm trying to, and this was the first digital routing console. So in the normal desk in those days was, you have a fader at the bottom, and then you usually had a pan pot, and if it was an inline desk, you had a potentiometer, which was the tape machine playing back. If it wasn't a split console, which you used to have, by the way, all the tape machine returns would be on another part, be a separate console basically. EQ section, and then your mic inputs, and then your meter. But they used to have a strip where there were all these little push buttons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like this, right? And they would route the signal of that channel to the corresponding track. Not this desk. It had 2 little push buttons and a center console, and you had to go beep, 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 like that to route channel
Routed.
13 to track 22. And then the ATR 124 also had digital routing. So you had to do the same with the. Oh man, it was like, wow, okay. And I looked at the patch bay and tried to figure out, because by that time I had never plugged in a TT plug into a patch bay before. I had got that far yet because I haven't really engineered. I mean, I'd done a little bit and a lot of home engineering on a Porter studio, but nothing real.
On that scale.
And and then he comes back and he says, "Right, let's do some acoustic guitar." And he goes out, puts his headphones on, and I'm going, and I'm looking around the console. Okay, monitors, right? Volume, nothing. Right, what? Oh, and I'm looking. I had a. By that time, I'd seen enough sessions to know the signal path: microphone, mic gain, patch into a compressor
Compressor.
or whatever it was, outboard EQ or something back into the console. So I was looking around for anything that moved, and I saw this Yuri 1176 doing this. So I went, okay. And I looked at the number on it, and I found it on the patch bay, traced that, okay, so he's in mic line 31, right? He's going into number 2. He's coming out. Oh, it's going to channel 13, let's say. My favorite was 13, because actually it's kind of close to you. That's the nice thing about in those days, before we had 64 channel desks. And so I put the fader up, I made sure it was routed, and then, tape machine. Put the tape machine on input, lo and behold, guitar. And he was so patient. He was just playing. He just wanted to see whether he had to put his guitar down, take his headphones on, and walk into the control room and go bang, 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 and then walk back out, which was great. It was a good test. Headphones. Hang on, is he hearing this? Because I didn't even think about the headphones then, and I went
The mixed.
and I found out that Mike, and of course he's got a TLM 117 Neumann in front of his acoustic guitar. His voice is going to sound like God through the through the speakers. He said yes. Good. So the headphones are working? Yeah, of course they are. So he'd already, he'd been working because he was used to working in the studio on his own. And I know what that's like because I've done many, many years of that. He had a special foot pedal where he could punch in with he'd take his shoes and socks off and punch in with his toes. He was just done with it. He wanted someone else in the control room, engineering and being able to be very musical. I want you to drop in on the eighth note after the third beat of this bar, and then out on the beginning of the next bar. Something like that. Well, I'm a musician. That's easy.
Yep, so you get it. Yeah.
All I've got to get used to is these rather big buttons. It's not like today where you just have a little keypad or even a mouse. These
Right.
are big industrial type buttons, and you've also got to get used to the delay of the tape going past the erase head, which is when you press that button, the erase head activates, and now you're erasing what was there before, and then the sync head, which is putting the information back on, and they are apart. So at 30 IPS, it's pretty close, but you have to get used to just being tiny little bit in front of the thing, not to chop the first note. But the player also has to be accurate because if he hits early and you punch in correctly, you're going to chop. He's going to lose the beginning of that first note, and that's why session musicians got to be so good and so accurate at playing, and their time so great because that's all we had in those days. We didn't get a second chance. So I really owe Mike everything in terms of becoming an engineer. He was my tutor. Yes, I was a pupil tutor, and he taught me so much during those 2 months that we worked together on Crises, and it was wonderful. And that was it. That I could now say I've engineered my first professional sessions as a co-engineer, and a co-producer too. So that was really the start of it.